What if the quiet man fixing the lights at your office was carrying a story no one ever bothered to ask? What if one snowy night, a single act of kindness set in motion a chain of events that neither power nor money could control? In today's story, we invite you into a world where dignity wears work boots and true strength speaks softly but never backs down. If you believe in stories that restore your faith in people, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We tell the kind that stay with you long after the screen fades. Now, let the story begin. Single dad pulled a woman from a car wreck. She turned out to be the CEO interviewing him tomorrow. The snow was falling in thick wind-lashed sheets as Jack Carter squinted through the windshield of his aging sedan. The wipers groaned with every pass barely keeping up. He leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the desolate stretch of road that curved along the East River under the flickering lights of the Manhattan Bridge. It was past midnight, and the city had grown quiet, at least above ground. Below the weight of winter, New York felt like it had stopped breathing. Jack's shift had ended an hour ago. He'd spent the evening repairing a busted HVAC unit at a third-rate motel that refused to heat more than one room at a time. His back ached. His fingers were cracked from the cold. And yet, he wasn't in a hurry. Emma would be asleep by now, curled up in their small one-bedroom apartment with the stuffed rabbit she refused to part with, no matter how threadbare its ears became. As he reached the bend near South Street, his headlights caught a violent flash of movement metal snow and glass flying in a chaotic burst. Jack slammed the brakes. His tires skidded, fishtailed, then found traction. A black SUV had crashed through the guardrail, spinning out, striking the concrete barrier hard enough to twist the frame. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood, and one tire continued to spin uselessly. "God," Jack muttered. No other cars, no voices, just the hissing and the flurry of snow that swallowed sound. Without thinking, he threw the car into park and ran. The wind ripped through his jacket. His boots crunched over ice as he crossed the distance, his breath ragged. He reached the wreck and yanked the driver's side door jammed. He darted to the passenger side and found it crumpled but not locked. Inside, a woman was slumped against the deployed airbag, blood trickling down from a gash above her eyebrow. Her chest rose and fell shallow but steady. "Hey," Jack yelled, knocking snow from his gloves and brushing hair from her face. "Hey, can you hear me?" She groaned faintly. The smoke was getting thicker. He could smell something, fuel, maybe oil. He didn't wait to confirm. Jack reached in, unbuckled her, and gently pulled her limp body toward him. She was slender, but not small, and dead weight was always heavier than it looked. Her left foot caught on the console. He tugged harder. The car groaned like something underneath was breaking. He got her out just as flames licked beneath the engine block. Snow swirled around them as he dragged her a safe distance and lowered her onto the frozen grass. His jacket came off in one motion, and he wrapped it around her as she trembled, half-conscious. "Don't move," he said gently. "Help's coming." She looked up at him with dazed, unfocused eyes. "You saved me." She whispered the words, barely audible over the wind. "What's your name?" Jack shook his head. "That doesn't matter. You're safe now." The sound of sirens approached, wailing and growing louder, bouncing off the underpass. Blue and red lights cut through the blizzard as the paramedics rushed toward them. Jack backed away. One EMT crouched beside her. "What's her name?" "Don't know," Jack replied. "She was in the wreck when I found her. You didn't call this in." He shook his head. Didn't have time. Another medic motioned for him to get checked, but Jack raised his hands. "I'm fine," he said, already stepping back toward the road. The woman turned her head weakly in his direction. Their eyes met for just a second, hers full of pain, confusion, maybe even gratitude. But then she was surrounded by responders, and Jack Carter, quiet, invisible. Jack faded back into the darkness. 15 minutes later, he sat behind the wheel of his car again, his hands still trembling as the heater blasted warm air over his face. His jacket was gone. His shirt was damp with melted snow, but his heartbeat had finally begun to slow. He didn't know why he hadn't told them his name. He just didn't want to. It didn't feel right to make it about him. As he pulled back into the slow-moving traffic, Jack allowed himself one glance in the rear-view mirror. He could still see the ambulance's flashing lights reflected in the night sky. But the woman, whoever she was gone now, and soon she would forget him too. He exhaled deeply and whispered to himself, "It's enough she's alive." What Jack didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the woman he had just saved wasn't just anyone. She was Ava Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries. And in exactly 72 hours, she would be sitting across from him in a glass-walled conference room, holding the final decision over the only job that might save his daughter's life. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, all that existed was a man who didn't walk away, and a life he refused to let slip into the dark. The knock came just after sunrise, quiet but firm. Jack Carter stirred from the worn recliner where he'd fallen asleep, still in yesterday's clothes. The blanket that usually covered his legs was now wrapped around his daughter Emma, who lay curled up on the couch a few feet away. Her cheeks were flushed with warmth, her breathing soft. Jack smiled, then rubbed his eyes stiff from sleeping upright. Another knock, more insistent. He opened the door to reveal Mrs. Rivera, their elderly neighbor from across the hall, holding a small paper bag and wearing her usual mismatched cardigan and floral slippers. "I brought those cranberry muffins Emma likes," she said, brushing snow off her shoulders. "And you got a call. They left a message on my landline." Sounded important. Jack blinked. A call, she handed him a scribbled note with a number and a name. Whitmore Industries. Some lady named Kayla. Jack's heart skipped. "Whitmore," he repeated, barely believing it. "That's what I said." She smiled kindly, then looked over his shoulder. "How's she doing?" Better Jack said. "She had a rough night. Cough wouldn't let her sleep." Mrs. Rivera nodded. "You go call them. I'll stay with Emma for a bit." Jack didn't argue. Minutes later, he was in the hallway outside, cell phone pressed to his ear, listening to a crisp voice on the other end. "Mr. Carter, this is Kayla Reynolds, executive assistant to Ms. Ava Whitmore. We'd like to invite you to interview for the facilities supervisor position. Are you available this Friday at 10 a.m.? Jack nearly dropped the phone. He had applied to Whitmore Industries months ago. It was a long shot, a top-tier company with top-tier benefits. The kind of job that came with a steady salary, health insurance, and the stability he desperately needed for Emma's treatments. But he'd heard nothing back. Not even a rejection. And now... "Yes," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, I'm available." Later that day, Jack stood in the bathroom staring at his reflection. He'd shaved for the first time in weeks, trying to tame the graying stubble along his jawline. He adjusted the collar of his cleanest button-down shirt, the one he saved for church on Easter. The corners were a bit frayed, but it was the best he had. Emma sat on the edge of the bathtub, swinging her legs. "You look nice, Daddy." "Thanks, Peanut. Are they going to give you the job?" Jack crouched down beside her, smoothing her hair back gently. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm going to try." She looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "I hope they say yes. Then you don't have to work late anymore. And we can go to the aquarium." Jack smiled, swallowing the tightness rising in his throat. That's the plan. Friday arrived with icy wind and a sky heavy with clouds. Jack walked into the Whitmore building, a modern glass-paneled skyscraper in Midtown with palms damp and heart thudding. The lobby gleamed all steel and silence. Polished floors reflected overhead lights like mirrors. People in suits moved swiftly, confidently. Jack felt like he'd stepped into another world. The receptionist greeted him with a brief smile and pointed him to the 29th floor. "Miss Whitmore will see you shortly." Jack's elevator ride was silent but nerve-wracking. He rehearsed answers in his head, his experience, his skills, why he wanted the job. But as the doors opened, his thoughts fell away. The conference room was walled with glass overlooking a gray Manhattan skyline. A long table ran through the center, and at the head of it, standing tall in a slate-gray suit with a scarf wrapped lightly at her throat, was the woman from the crash. Jack froze. She was unmistakable, though her hair was neatly tied back now, and the bruise near her temple had faded to a faint shadow. She looked composed, regal almost. But her eyes, the same eyes he had seen wide with pain in the cold, were on him now, and they widened just slightly with recognition. A flicker passed between them. Jack blinked once, unsure if she would say anything. He half expected her to stand up and say, "You're the man who pulled me from the wreck." But she didn't. She smiled with the cool precision of a professional and gestured to the seat across from her. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly, her voice like polished glass. "Thank you for coming in." Jack sat down, his heart thudding. She remembers. He could see it in her eyes. But why wasn't she saying anything? The interview began. Ava's questions were sharp-focused. She probed his knowledge of HVAC systems, electrical schematics, emergency protocols. She asked about how he would handle supply chain issues, union coordination, overnight maintenance schedules. Jack answered the best he could, drawing on years of hands-on experience. He wasn't polished. He didn't use corporate buzzwords. But his voice was steady, his answers thoughtful. What confused him was her intensity, not hostility, but curiosity. Like she wasn't just evaluating his resume. She was trying to see through him, and still not one word about that night. After 30 minutes, she closed the folder in front of her. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. We'll be in touch by Monday." Jack rose, nodded politely, and offered a tight smile. "Thank you for the opportunity." As he turned to leave, her voice followed him. "Mr. Carter." He paused. Ava tilted her head, and for the first time her voice softened. "Why did you leave before the ambulance arrived?" Jack turned slowly, puzzled. "I didn't want to be in the way." Her eyes lingered on his face. "That's rare," she said quietly. Jack held her gaze for a beat, then simply replied, "Sometimes doing the right thing means you don't need to be seen." Ava didn't answer. She simply watched as he turned again and walked out of the room. Only when the door clicked shut behind him did she finally allow herself to exhale. Yes, it was him. And somehow that changed everything. Ava Whitmore stood alone in the conference room after Jack Carter had gone, the silence folding around her like a second skin. She remained still, fingers pressed lightly to her lips, eyes lingering on the chair he had just vacated. The city, beyond the glass, seemed far away, its noise muffled by the weight of what she had just seen, what she had just confirmed. It was him, the man from the snowstorm, the man who had pulled her from the wreckage with bare hands, wrapped her in his jacket, and vanished before she could thank him. She had remembered the voice first, calm, steady, urgent. Then the eyes. Honest, steady, not asking for anything, not even a name. And now he sat across from her in a buttoned-up shirt hair slightly unruly, answering technical questions with quiet humility. No mention of what he had done, no glint of expectation. She had built her career on instinct, reading people faster than they could read themselves. And yet this man had blindsided her. Ava exhaled, her mind buzzing with contradictions. If she acknowledged him as her rescuer, would he think she brought him here out of guilt, out of obligation? That wouldn't be fair to him or to herself. She needed time. Meanwhile, Jack stepped into the elevator with a strange mix of relief and confusion. The interview had gone better than expected, but his nerves hadn't settled. There had been something unusual in the way Ava looked at him, curious, searching. Did she know? No, he told himself. It was just coincidence. She wouldn't remember him from that night. It had been dark, chaotic. Her head was bleeding. She probably never saw his face. Still, the way she paused at the end, the question about leaving before the ambulance came. Why would she ask that he walked out of the building boots, crunching the slush on the curb, his breath fogging in the frigid air? He pulled his coat tighter. The scarf he usually wore, he realized with a quiet jolt, was still with her. He had left it wrapped around her that night. Jack smiled to himself, barely. He didn't need the scarf back. Back at the office, Ava returned to her corner suite and sat heavily behind her desk. She stared at the email draft on her screen for a full minute before deleting it entirely. Instead, she reached for her phone. "Kayla," she said when her assistant picked up. "I want a full background check on Jack Carter education work history family." Quietly. There was a pause. "Is something wrong?" "No," Ava said softly. "Not wrong. Just different." That evening, Jack picked up Emma from Mrs. Rivera's apartment across the hall. She ran into his arms with a gleeful squeal, her little backpack bouncing behind her. "How'd it go?" Mrs. Rivera asked, passing him Emma's lunchbox. "I think, okay," Jack replied. "She didn't throw me out, so that's something." Mrs. Rivera chuckled, then gave him a look, gentle but probing. "You know, Jack, sometimes life circles back in the strangest ways." Jack furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "Just a feeling," she said, smiling as she turned back toward her apartment. "Sometimes people who show up out of nowhere, they're not really strangers." Jack held Emma's hand as they stepped into their own small apartment. Her hand was warm in his. "Did you get the job, Daddy?" "Not yet," he said, kneeling to meet her eyes. "But we might be close." She tilted her head. "If you do get it, can we get blueberry pancakes again?" "Like on your birthday." Jack laughed softly, pulling her into a hug. "Yeah, Peanut, I think we can manage that." At Whitmore Industries, Ava sat alone in her office, staring at the security camera footage from the crash site. She had acquired the recording 2 days ago from the city's traffic control center after filing a formal request. It had taken time, but she had insisted. On screen, the black SUV careened into the barrier snow, exploding like smoke. A long moment passed. Then came the blur of movement, a man running toward the wreck. She watched it again, eyes fixed on his form as he wrenched the passenger door open and pulled her out, stumbling in the snow, wrapping her in his coat and laying her down with a gentleness she hadn't felt in years. There was something about the way he looked at her even on camera. Not pity. Not awe, just purpose. Ava closed the laptop. Her heart thudded. She had made it to the top by guarding herself by believing that people always wanted something money, power, access. But Jack had walked away from her that night. He didn't know who she was. He didn't ask, and that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The following morning, Jack received an email from Whitmore Industries. He opened it with trembling fingers. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Carter. We are pleased to move you forward to the final consideration round. Details to follow." His shoulders sagged with relief. For the first time in a long time, something had gone right. And yet, the image of Ava's eyes lingered in his mind. She knew. He could feel it. Back at Whitmore, Ava stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her office, arms crossed, watching the city unfurl in pale morning light. Snow had stopped. The streets below gleamed with salt and thawing ice. She tapped her fingers against her elbow, mind still restless. Jack Carter was not like the others who had passed through her company's doors, ambitious, performative, rehearsed. He was real. And she wasn't sure what to do with that. But one thing was certain, he was no longer just a name on a resume. He was the man who didn't walk away. And for reasons she couldn't explain, maybe didn't want to, she wasn't ready to walk away either. The basement of Whitmore Tower was a far cry from the executive suites above. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow on rows of utility panels and boiler tanks that hummed like distant thunder. Jack stood with a wrench in one hand and a clipboard in the other, double-checking the settings on the backup generator. It had been 1 week since the interview, and Ava Whitmore had made her decision. He was hired. Just like that. No fanfare, no personal note. A formal email, crisp and direct like everything else about her. Jack hadn't seen Ava since that day in the glass-walled room. In fact, he'd barely glimpsed her at all, save for one fleeting moment in the elevator where she entered with 2 board members and didn't acknowledge him beyond the briefest of nods. and yet he could still feel her presence like static in the air. He didn't know what to make of her silence. She hadn't mentioned the night of the crash, hadn't thanked him, hadn't even hinted that she remembered. But something told Jack it wasn't forgotten. Not by her, and certainly not by him. New guy, someone called from behind. Jack turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man approaching with a clipboard of his own and a sideways smile. "I'm Luke, head of overnight crew. You're Cartwright." "Yeah." "Jack." Luke extended a hand. "We've heard about you." Jack raised an eyebrow. Already Luke smirked. Hard not to. "Word is, Ms. Whitmore herself requested you for this role. People talk." Jack's expression remained neutral. "I just came here to do my job." Luke tilted his head, studying him. "That's rare around here. Most folks come to be seen. You just come to work." Jack gave a small shrug. "I've got a daughter. I don't have time for politics." Luke clapped him on the shoulder. "You'll fit right in with the night crew." By week's end, Jack had repaired 2 ventilation faults, reprogrammed a malfunctioning control panel, and climbed into a crawlspace to fix a burst pipe that others had avoided for months. He didn't complain. He didn't grandstand. He just did the work and did it well. But not everyone was impressed. In a high-level meeting on the 30th floor, Gregory Sloan, COO of Whitmore Industries and Ava's longtime lieutenant, slammed a folder onto the glass table. "This Carter guy," he said, voice taut. Where did he even come from? Ava, seated at the head of the table, didn't look up. He came from our applicant pool. He was qualified. He was buried in the bottom third. Gregory shot back. "You bypassed protocol. No second interview. No peer review." Why Ava finally met his gaze. "Because I saw something the system didn't." Gregory leaned forward. "You're going soft. We're heading into Q4 under pressure. This is not the time to experiment." Ava's eyes hardened. "He's not an experiment. He's a solution." Gregory leaned back, lips pursed. "He's also a wild card. Quiet types tend to have something to hide." Ava paused, voice cool. "Maybe it's that the loud ones have already shown their hands." Gregory scowled but said nothing more. He'd known Ava long enough to recognize that tone. Debate was over. Downstairs, Jack was crouched in a utility hallway checking wiring that had shorted during last night's snow. The chill from the outside seeped in through the concrete walls, but he was used to discomfort. What he wasn't used to still was the silence that followed him. It wasn't just quiet, it was intentional. People had started to notice. Some avoided eye contact. Others whispered when he passed. Jack tried to shrug it off, but the feeling crawled under his skin. After hours, he asked Luke about it. "They think you're connected," Luke said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Connected." Luke nodded. "To Ava. To Sloan. To someone. Nobody comes in here and jumps protocol without strings." Jack sighed, leaning back against a panel. "I don't have strings. Just a sick kid and a second chance." Luke studied him for a long moment. "Then you better be twice as good and half as visible. They don't like what they can't explain." That night, Jack returned home just after midnight. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch again, her little body curled around the rabbit she refused to replace. He picked her up, gently, tucked her into bed, then sat on the edge of the mattress watching her breathe. There were days he felt like a ghost walking through a world that barely acknowledged him. But here, in this small apartment with its chipped paint and leaky faucet, he was still needed. Still seen. He reached into the drawer and pulled out the hospital bill he hadn't opened yet. $3,840, just for the latest round of Emma's tests. He folded it slowly, setting it aside. This job, it had to work. There was no plan B. Upstairs, Ava lingered in her office long after the building had emptied. She stood by the window watching the snow begin to fall again, softer this time. She had reviewed Jack's personnel file twice. His credentials were solid. His references glowed. But that wasn't why she'd hired him. It was what he'd done when no one was looking. She hadn't forgotten the feel of his jacket still damp with snow, or the way he'd said, "You're safe now," like it was a promise he meant with his whole life. And he had left, without waiting to be thanked. That mattered more than any resume. Still, she had remained silent, partly out of uncertainty, partly out of fear that acknowledging what had happened might change everything, make it feel transactional. But silence had its cost. She turned from the window and looked down at her desk. On top sat a sealed envelope, an invitation to the annual corporate reception next Friday. Black tie, dozens of eyes, and always politics. She slid it aside. Maybe it was time to disrupt the script. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that what happened that night wasn't real. Ava picked up her phone, scrolled to Jack Carter's employee file, and paused. She didn't call him. Not yet. But something had shifted. Because in a world full of people fighting to be seen, she had just begun to notice the only man who wasn't trying at all. And that was precisely what made him unforgettable. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving behind a thin, glittering crust on the city's shoulders. Jack Carter stood in the modest kitchen of his apartment, buttoning Emma's coat while balancing her small pink lunchbox under one arm. "You sure you're okay coming with me today?" he asked, crouching to zip her up. Emma nodded enthusiastically, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mrs. Rivera has that doctor appointment, right?" Jack smiled. "Yeah, and the sitter canceled. And I promised to be quiet like a cat," she added, miming a silent paw step. He tapped her nose gently. "I'll hold you to that." Whitmore Tower felt different when Jack entered with Emma beside him. She clutched his hand, her eyes darting from the gleaming marble floors to the elevator's glass-paneled walls, which revealed a dizzying view of Manhattan rising around them. She looked small under the fluorescent lights, her rainbow knit hat bobbing with every step. They rode the elevator down to the facilities wing where the hum of machines and the echo of footsteps offered a strange kind of comfort. "This is where you work?" she asked in a whisper. "Yep," Jack said. "It's not glamorous, but it keeps the lights on, literally." Emma giggled, then hugged his arm. "It smells like socks." He laughed, and for a moment the world felt lighter. By mid-morning, Jack was replacing ceiling tiles in the third-floor break room, while Emma sat on a bench nearby, drawing quietly with the crayons he always kept in his backpack just in case. Upstairs, Ava was walking through the corridor with a tablet in hand, reviewing supply budgets, her heels clicking against the polished floors. Her assistant, Kayla, trailed behind, relaying the agenda for the upcoming board meeting. As they turned a corner, Ava stopped abruptly. Through the open door of the break room, she caught a glimpse of a small girl in a purple jacket seated alone, scribbling colorful shapes across printer paper. And sitting beside her, arms deep in a ceiling panel, was Jack. Kayla continued walking, oblivious. Ava stayed. For a moment, she simply watched. She hadn't expected this, hadn't even known Jack had a child. But as she observed the gentle glance he gave Emma every few seconds and the quiet, confident way the girl moved in his orbit, something within her stirred. Emma looked up and saw her. Ava blinked. The child stared at her for a beat, curious but not afraid. Then she lifted her crayon and offered a small wave. Ava, surprised by her own reaction, lifted her fingers in return. "Hi, Emma," mouthed silently. "Hi, Ava," said back her voice barely audible. Jack finally noticed and turned. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between apology and tension. "I'm sorry," he said, stepping down from the ladder. "Our sitter had an emergency. I didn't want to miss work." Ava didn't scold. Instead, she stepped closer, studying Emma, who was now holding up her drawing proudly. "Is this yours?" Ava asked. Emma nodded. "It's a city, but nicer, with no traffic." Jack cleared his throat. "We can head out." "No need," Ava interrupted softly. She turned to Emma. "I like your imagination." Then to Jack, more quietly. "She's beautiful." "How old, 9?" he said, cautious. "She reminds me of someone," Ava murmured. Then she smiled as if catching herself. "Let me know if you need a more private space next time." Jack blinked. "Thank you. That means a lot." She nodded, gave Emma one more warm glance, then turned and left without another word. But the moment lingered. Later that evening, as they walked home through soft flurries of snow, Emma tugged on Jack's sleeve. "Was that lady your boss?" "Yes." "She's pretty," Jack chuckled. "She's also very smart and busy." She looked kind of sad. Emma said, her voice thoughtful. Jack stopped walking. "Sad," he repeated. Emma nodded, like her heart had a Band-Aid on it. Jack didn't respond right away. Instead, he lifted her onto his shoulders and continued down the sidewalk, the wind carrying the scent of roasted peanuts from a street cart nearby. Sometimes, he said, even strong people have parts that still hurt. That night, Ava stood in her penthouse overlooking a city lit in gold and silver. A wine glass sat untouched beside her. On the table was the drawing Emma had left behind. Kayla had retrieved it after they'd gone. A city, with no traffic, a river running through the center, bridges made of flowers. She turned it over. On the back, in blocky handwriting, it read, "For Daddy, because he makes broken things better." Ava stared at it until her eyes blurred. She remembered her father, how he used to fix broken watches, taking them apart and putting them back together without manuals. She remembered how he stopped doing that after her mother left, as if the world had broken in a way he couldn't fix. She'd built everything this company, her reputation, her fortress of solitude, on the belief that no one would catch her if she fell. But someone had, and now she had seen the man who caught her not just in the act of saving a life, but in the act of quietly living for someone else. Emma wasn't just a child. She was his why. And Ava was starting to wonder if she'd ever had one of those for herself. She placed the drawing gently on her desk. Maybe it wasn't just Jack she needed to understand. Maybe it was time to learn what it meant to fix things that weren't machines, like people, like trust, like herself, and maybe like someone else's tomorrow. The storm had returned overnight, cloaking Manhattan in a curtain of snow by morning. But Ava Whitmore didn't notice the weather. She stood in her office, perfectly still, the silence so complete that the faint tick of the antique clock on her bookshelf sounded like a drumbeat in her ear. On her desk, a flash drive lay next to her laptop like a live wire. She had waited nearly 2 weeks for the city's Department of Transportation to release the footage, had pulled strings signed, waivers even met in person with the assistant commissioner. A request like this wasn't common. But then Ava Whitmore was no ordinary citizen. She sat down, inserted the drive, and opened the folder. Her breath caught the moment the file loaded. Timestamp 11:52 p.m. Location FDR Drive near South Street. Weather heavy snow. Camera fixed traffic unit 04-7. She hit play. At first, there was nothing, just the ghostly sheen of headlights flickering through snow and the empty icy road below. Then a flash. A vehicle veered sharply from the left lane, spun, and slammed into the guardrail with a metallic shriek even the mute recording seemed to carry. Her SUV. She watched her own accident unfold like a scene from someone else's nightmare. The next 10 seconds were a void. No movement, no bystanders. The snow thickened. Then, suddenly, there he was. A man running from the shadows, silhouetted by his own headlights. He sprinted to the wreck, yanked at the passenger door. Nothing. He circled to the driver's side, crouched, pried, pulled until the door gave. The man leaned inside, bracing himself against the frame. Ava leaned forward, one hand over her mouth. The angle didn't show his face clearly, but she didn't need it. The posture, the shape, the urgency. It was Jack. He pulled her out slowly, carefully, as if she were made of glass. Then he collapsed onto the snow with her in his arms. His jacket came off, wrapped around her shoulders. He checked her pulse, held her face, murmured something they couldn't hear. Then he stood and left. No ambulance, no police yet. He simply walked away into the night. Ava sat frozen as the screen faded to black. A knock on the glass pulled her from the trance. Kayla stood at the door. I didn't mean to interrupt. The 10 a.m. was pushed to noon. And Mr. Sloane is asking for, I'll handle him later, Ava said softly. Kayla glanced at the screen, recognized the paused image. Her eyes widened. Is that? Yes. Kayla stepped closer. You were right. It was him. Ava nodded, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. He never told me. Why would he? Ava looked down. Because he saved my life. Kayla hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Maybe that's exactly why he didn't. That afternoon, Jack was in the mechanical control room tracing a glitch in the security access panel logs. The fluorescent lights above flickered with that peculiar stutter they always did when a snowstorm passed through. He was halfway through testing a relay switch when a voice came from behind. I see you still fix things yourself. He turned. Ava stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable but far gentler than usual. No tablet, no phone, just her. I try, Jack said, standing. What can I help you with? She stepped inside. Actually, I came to say something, and I didn't want to do it over email or in a hallway. Jack wiped his hands and waited. I know it was you, she said. That night. The crash. He didn't move, didn't deny it, just held her gaze. I requested the traffic footage, she added. I needed to see it with my own eyes, and now I have. Jack looked down, exhaled slowly. I didn't think you'd remember. I remembered your voice first, she said, then your hands. The way you spoke to me. Calm, like you'd done it before. I haven't, he said quietly. She nodded. That's what makes it even more incredible. Silence settled between them like snowfall, gentle but weighted. Why didn't you tell me, she finally asked. Jack leaned against the wall, folding his arms. Because you didn't need to know. You were okay. That's all I cared about. Ava studied him, then said, That's not how people work in this city. Jack gave a half smile. I guess I missed the memo. She chuckled, soft and unguarded, and for a moment it felt like the air between them warmed. I owe you my life, Ava said. And I don't say that lightly. Not just as a woman, but as someone who hasn't needed anyone for a long time. Jack looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. You don't owe me anything. But if I'm being honest, maybe I needed that night as much as you did. She tilted her head. Why? Because I'd forgotten what it feels like to make a difference. To matter. That moment. It reminded me. Ava's throat tightened. She stepped closer, voice quiet. You mattered long before that night, Jack. I just didn't see it. Their eyes locked. The room, the building, the city outside, it all fell away for a breathless second. And though nothing was said aloud, something between them shifted. Recognition. Respect. Something tender. Ava broke the moment with a gentle nod. There's a corporate event next Friday. Black tie, board members, speeches. Most people will be faking smiles and swapping business cards. Jack raised an eyebrow. Sounds riveting. She smiled. I want you to come. He blinked. Me as my guest, she said. Not as a favor. Not because of the past. But because maybe it's time the people in that room met someone real. Jack didn't answer right away, but then quietly he said, I'll think about it. Ava nodded, then turned to leave. And just before stepping through the door, she looked over her shoulder. Thank you, Jack, for that night, and for not walking away. Then she was gone, and Jack was left standing in the hum of wires and lights, heart pounding not because of what had happened, but because of what might just be beginning. The invitation sat on Jack's kitchen table for 3 days before he even touched it again. Thick, cream-colored cardstock, the Whitmore Industries logo embossed in gold at the top. Below it, annual corporate reception. Whitmore Tower Grand Ballroom. Formal attire required. He turned it over slowly in his hands as Emma ate cereal beside him, her eyes darting between her spoon and her father. Are you going to go? Jack looked up. To what, that fancy party thing, she said, clearly eavesdropping. You keep looking at the envelope like it's going to bite you." He chuckled. "You think I'd fit in there?" Emma tilted her head. "Do they have food?" "Probably." "Then yes." He laughed, but there was a weight behind his smile. It wasn't the dress code or the glitz that unsettled him. It was the idea of walking into that room as her guest. That phrase alone invited 100 interpretations, and none of them sat comfortably with him. Because no matter what Ava said or how she looked at him that day in the control room, Jack still felt like a man on the outside of something too polished, too precise. By the time Friday arrived, Jack had made his decision, if only because Emma had helped pick out a tie, and Mrs. Rivera insisted on ironing his one decent jacket while humming old Sinatra tunes. "You walk into that room with your head high," she said. "The people worth knowing will see who you are. And the rest, they don't matter." He'd nodded, grateful, but a part of him still questioned what Ava really wanted from him. Gratitude. A story. A headline for her board. Or something more dangerous, connection. The Whitmore ballroom shimmered beneath a canopy of crystal lights and live-string music. Waiters in black ties glided across the floor with silver trays. Industry titans shook hands like they were brokering peace treaties. And at the far end of the room, near a grand staircase, stood Ava Whitmore. She was dressed in a midnight blue gown that was understated but unmistakably elegant. Her hair swept into a soft chignon, her only jewelry a thin silver bracelet that caught the light when she turned her wrist. Yet it wasn't any of that made Jack pause as he entered. It was her eyes. She saw him across the room before anyone else did, and for a moment the noise dulled. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, but the warmth in her gaze was undeniable, like she was relieved he came. A junior executive approached Jack quickly. "Sir, can I see your invite?" Jack held it up. The man glanced at it, then at Jack's well-worn jacket and scuffed shoes. His polite smile faltered. "Oh, you're Miss Whitmore's guest." Before Jack could reply, Ava was already at his side. "Jack," she said, voice calm and clear. "Glad you made it." The junior exec paled slightly and backed away. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Was that my first test?" "No," she said, her lips tugging upward. "That comes later." She offered her arm. He hesitated, then took it. The evening blurred into conversation and introductions. Ava moved through the crowd like water fluid poised commanding, and Jack, despite himself, found he didn't want to leave her side. Not because he was dazzled by the event, but because next to her he felt seen. Still, not everyone shared Ava's perspective. Across the room, Gregory Sloane watched them with narrowed eyes, his scotch glass tight in his grip. He'd spent the last 2 weeks digging through Jack Carter's file, convinced there was a missing piece. No man got that close to Ava professionally or personally without a reason, and tonight Jack had shown up not just as a guest but on her arm. Unacceptable. Gregory approached just as Ava stepped away to speak to a board member. Jack stood alone for the first time in an hour, scanning the room. Gregory moved in. "Jack Carter, isn't it?" he asked, a tone like a blade wrapped in velvet. Jack nodded. "That's me. Gregory Sloane, COO. He offered his hand. Jack shook it. "I've been meaning to chat," Gregory continued. "You've made quite the impression lately." Jack sensed something cold beneath the civility. "Just doing my job. That's what concerns me." Jack blinked. "Excuse me. You see, we have a culture here. Processes. Protocols. And I find it troubling when someone leaps over all of them and lands in a senior position without so much as a second interview." Jack folded his arms. "I didn't leap anywhere. I was hired." Gregory's voice dropped. "You were selected. By Ava. Personally. That kind of decision carries weight and consequences." There was no threat in the words, and yet it felt like one. Jack didn't flinch. "I didn't ask for special treatment." "No," Gregory said, stepping closer, "but you're standing in a room full of people who think you did." Before Jack could respond, Ava reappeared. "Gregory," she said, eyes flashing. "I see you've met Jack." "We were just chatting," he said smoothly, but Jack could tell she heard the undertone. Ava placed a hand on Jack's arm. "Excuse us?" She led him to the edge of the ballroom near the balcony. The night air filtered in through open doors, crisp and sharp. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "He shouldn't have cornered you." "He's not wrong," Jack said. "People are talking, wondering why I'm here, why you brought me." She looked up at him. "Do you wonder?" Jack hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but I wonder if you do." The question hung between them. "I brought you," she said slowly, "because I trust you. Because you remind me of who I wanted to be before all of this." He searched her face, surprised by the vulnerability. "And because," she added, "you're the only person in this room who doesn't want anything from me." Jack exhaled. The wind caught his tie, fluttered it against his chest. "I came because Emma said I should," he admitted. Ava smiled, eyes soft. "Smart girl." They stood in silence for a long moment, side by side, watching the city lights burn beneath them. Not rivals, not strangers, just two people worn but alive on the edge of something neither fully understood yet. And, for the first time, Ava didn't feel like she had to control what came next. She just had to trust it. The Monday after the reception dawned with a clear sky, crisp air, and the distinct chill of judgment lingering beneath polished smiles. Jack arrived earlier than usual, not because he was trying to prove anything, but because he needed to be grounded. After the whirlwind of Friday night of standing beside Ava under chandeliers and scrutiny, the hum of machinery and the metallic scent of tools were a relief. He was halfway through tightening a boiler valve in the sub-basement when Luke found him. "You're officially famous," Luke said. Arms crossed a teasing edge in his voice. Jack looked up. "I assume you're not talking about my pipe work?" Luke handed him a folded copy of the Morning Ledger. On the front page was a photo taken at the Whitmore reception. Ava in her evening gown, Jack beside her slightly turned mid-laugh. The caption read, "The CEO and the Mystery Man." A new power duo at Whitmore. Jack exhaled slowly. "I didn't even see a camera," he muttered. "Doesn't matter," Luke said. "You stood next to Ava Whitmore in front of 24 board members, half the city's business elite, and Gregory Sloane's worst dreams. Someone was bound to snap a photo." Jack handed the paper back. "Let me guess, Gregory's not thrilled." "Thrilled," Luke scoffed. "He's in war mode." Jack's stomach tightened. He had expected gossip, but not headlines. Upstairs, Ava sat at the head of the conference table in the executive boardroom. The temperature in the room was cold, though the heating system worked just fine. Around her sat a collection of men in tailored suits and calculated frowns. Gregory Sloane paced at the end of the room, arms folded, voice low but cutting. "I have to ask Ava, what exactly are we doing?" Ava looked up from her tablet, calm and composed. "Clarify your question. You brought a maintenance technician to a black tie board event," Gregory said. "You gave him access to our executive tier. Now we're on page 1 of the ledger like we're filming a soap opera." A board member spoke up. "The investors are calling. They want to know if there's a personal entanglement that compromises judgment." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Are we really pretending that male executives haven't brought personal guests to that same event for years?" Jack wore a tie. He didn't ask for a spotlight. "But you gave him one," Gregory snapped. Silence. Then Ava leaned forward, her voice even but steely. "You're all missing the point. You're looking at optics headlines. I'm looking at integrity. That man Jack Carter pulled me out of a burning car and walked away without telling a soul. He works harder than half the people on this floor. He doesn't network. He doesn't manipulate. And that scares you because it's the one thing you can't control." Several men shifted in their seats. Gregory's jaw flexed. "He doesn't belong here." Ava's voice was razor sharp. "Then maybe we need to reconsider who does." Down in the facility corridor, Jack was checking heat differentials in the core HVAC system when his employee badge suddenly failed to open the next sector door. He tried again. Nothing. Frowning, he called up the building's access panel. His clearance had been revoked. Before he could react, Luke came jogging up the hallway. "They pulled your security," Luke said, breath short. It came from upstairs. Orders from Sloane's office. Something about a temporary review. Jack's jaw clenched. "So I'm being iced out." "They didn't even notify you?" Luke asked. Jack shook his head. "No, of course not." By noon, Jack had packed his tools and was sitting in the back stairwell with a lukewarm coffee trying to make sense of the last 72 hours. He had never asked to be elevated, never expected invitations, headlines, or receptions. All he'd done was tell the truth and do his job. And now it seemed that was too threatening for people like Gregory Sloane. A knock on the metal door pulled him from his thoughts. Ava stepped inside, coat still buttoned from an outside meeting. She looked tired but fierce. "I just came from the board," she said, voice calm but heavy. "They're circling." Jack rose to his feet. "I figured. They've suspended your system access pending a re-evaluation of internal structure." "It's not a termination." "Yet." Jack's brow furrowed. "You can override it." "I did. Twice." Sloane reinstated the lock. "He's manipulating procedure." "I don't want you to fight for me," Jack said gently but firmly. "This isn't your battle." "It is," Ava said. "Because I brought you into this mess. Because this company needs men like you more than it needs 10 Gregory Sloanes." Jack shook his head. "I don't belong in the middle of a corporate power game, Ava. I'm not built for politics. I'm built for boilers and wiring and Emma." She stepped closer. "That's why you belong. Because you know why you're here. And I'm not asking you to play a game. I'm asking you not to walk away from something that matters." Jack's voice dropped. "Do you really believe I'm the one being tested here?" Ava didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "Maybe we both are." They stood in silence, tension and tenderness swirling between them like storm winds against glass. Then Ava reached into her coat and handed him a sealed envelope. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting on Friday. I want you there." Jack hesitated. "Why?" "Because I'm not going to defend your presence behind closed doors anymore," she said. "If they want answers, they can hear them from you." He opened the envelope. Inside was a formal summons with his name on it. Jack looked at her quiet and steady. "I don't like attention," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's why they need to hear your voice." That night, Jack returned home to find Emma asleep on the couch with her rabbit tucked under her chin and a drawing on the table. It was a picture of him in a suit standing in front of a tall building with stars drawn above his head. In crayon, she had written, "You're a hero, Daddy, even if nobody knows it yet." Jack sat beside her, stared at the drawing for a long time, and whispered, "They're about to." Friday morning arrived wrapped in silence. Jack stood in front of the mirror buttoning the collar of the same dress shirt he wore to the interview weeks ago. It had been ironed again, this time by Mrs. Rivera, who'd said nothing but patted his arm and left a folded note inside his jacket pocket. The truth doesn't need permission. Emma peeked from the bedroom doorway, hugging her rabbit. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Jack turned to her and nodded. "A little." She stepped closer, slipping something into his hand. A small folded square of paper with a drawing of him stick figure toolbox in one hand, a glowing star above his head. "Heroes don't have to yell," she whispered. Jack swallowed hard and hugged her tight. At Whitmore Tower, the air on the 30th floor was razor thin. Ava sat at the head of the long mahogany table, every board member in place, their expressions carefully curated into neutrality. The walls were glass, the city stretching out behind them like a silent jury. Gregory Sloane sat directly opposite Ava, fingers steepled, a faint smirk playing on his lips. His message had been clear all week. "You brought him in. Now let's see you defend him." Ava stood as Jack entered. No suit. Just a button-down, clean jeans, boots polished as best he could. He looked out of place in the room, but somehow also the most grounded person there. Ava gestured to the seat beside her. Mr. Carter said Gregory without looking up. This isn't a disciplinary hearing, to be clear. This is simply a clarification of roles, ensuring we're aligned on company culture and expectations. Jack took his seat calmly. Happy to clarify. A chuckle rose from the far end of the table. You certainly made an impression. Gregory leaned forward. The concern, frankly, is influence. Optics. A senior employee being fast-tracked under executive favor raises questions. Jack met his gaze evenly. I was hired after one interview because your CEO saw something in me. Not because I asked for anything. I've shown up. I've worked. I've kept my head down. If that's what bothers you, I don't think I'm the one with something to explain. A few brows lifted. One board member scribbled something in her notebook. Let's be honest, Mr. Carter said. Gregory, you were the man in the photo. That image suggested closeness, not professionalism. Jack sat forward. You want to talk about the photo? Fine, but let's talk about the moment before it was taken. He looked at each person around the table. She invited me because I saved her life. On a street in the snow when nobody else stopped. I didn't know her name. I didn't know who she was. I didn't care. I did it because I believe in doing what's right even when nobody's watching. A hush fell over the room. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't use it to get a job or leverage or favors. I came here because I need work. I have a daughter. I fix things pipes, wiring, machines. It's what I do. He paused. But I think you're afraid I might fix something else. Something deeper. Like how we treat people who can't talk their way into rooms like this. Ava didn't move, but her chest rose with a slow breath. Gregory narrowed his eyes. You're implying we're broken. Jack stood. I'm not implying anything. I'm saying that when leadership stops recognizing integrity just because it comes in a worn jacket instead of a tailored suit, then yes, something's broken. No one interrupted him. And if what makes someone a threat here is not wanting anything but to do the job well, then maybe I'm in the wrong place. He turned to Ava. Unless I'm not. She looked up at him steady. You're not. Jack nodded once. Then you'll know where to find me. He walked toward the door, his steps even. For a moment it felt like no one breathed. Just before exiting, Jack turned back. For what it's worth, he added, voice quieter now. I don't belong here to make noise. I'm here to make sure when people turn on the lights they stay on. Then he left. Silence held the boardroom in a suspended state. Then a woman from the far end of the table, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, spoke. I've been on this board 22 years, she said. That's the first time anyone in this room reminded me why we exist. Several others nodded slowly. Gregory looked shaken but forced a smile. Well, perhaps that's enough drama for one morning. No, Ava said, rising to her feet. Not yet. She faced them all standing tall. Jack Carter is not a symbol. He's not a headline. He's a reminder that we've strayed too far from the people who make this company run. She glanced around. Today isn't about Jack proving he belongs. It's about us proving we deserve to keep him. Then, without waiting for consensus, she collected her files. Meeting adjourned. That evening, Jack returned home exhausted but lighter. Emma greeted him at the door with her newest drawing, a tower glowing with stars and a small figure in a hard hat at the base. This is your building now, she said proudly, because you're the one who keeps the lights on. Jack knelt and pulled her into his arms. Maybe she was right. Maybe all along what made someone belong wasn't who they knew or what they wore, but what they stood for. And today, he had stood. For something. For himself. For everyone like him. And the light stayed on. The sun poured into Ava's office through tall windows, casting long golden stripes across the polished floor. It was the first truly warm morning of the year, the kind of light that made glass buildings feel like greenhouses and reminded people there was still life outside quarterly reports. But Ava Whitmore felt nothing of it. She sat at her desk, the boardroom transcript open in front of her fingers, laced under her chin. The room was quiet, too quiet. Even the ever-present buzz of Kayla's typing outside the glass wall was absent. In truth, she was waiting. She'd dismissed her entire morning schedule. She needed space. Not to make a decision she already had, but to feel the full weight of it before she acted. Downstairs, Jack was back in the boiler room, wrench in hand, repairing a broken valve he could have fixed in his sleep. But his hands worked more slowly today. Not from hesitation, but reflection. The boardroom confrontation had been 3 days ago, and still the tension lingered in the walls. People looked at him differently now, some with respect, others with wariness, and a few with something closer to resentment. But what mattered most was that he looked at himself differently. He had stood his ground, and, surprisingly, the world hadn't fallen apart. Yet he couldn't shake the sense that Ava was still fighting battles he hadn't been invited to see. And maybe that was about to change. Ava finally rose from her chair and walked to the window. Below, the city was moving brisk, oblivious, alive. She thought about everything that had brought her here, the accident, the fire, the rescue, the quiet man who had slipped away without expecting anything, and then walked back into her life through a door she hadn't even known she'd left open. For years, she had told herself leadership meant solitude, distance, iron discipline. But Jack had reminded her of something else, that integrity had nothing to do with power and loyalty didn't have to be bought. She reached for the folder on her desk. Inside it was the proposal for a new corporate initiative, something Jack had unknowingly inspired. A partnership between Whitmore Industries and the city's underfunded trade schools. Technical apprenticeships, paid internships, real pathways for people like Jack and the many others who wouldn't otherwise be seen. She'd named the initiative the Second Light Program, because Jack hadn't just turned on a switch in her building. He'd turned one on inside her. Later that afternoon, Ava appeared in the facility's office without warning. Jack looked up from his workbench, surprised. "You're early," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "I canceled my meetings," she said. "Needed to see someone who doesn't pretend for a living." He chuckled. "You'll get me in trouble with your PR team." She handed him a folder. "I want you to read this." He opened it, scanned the first page, then looked up sharply. "This is your idea." "It's yours," she said. "You just didn't pitch it." He flipped the page, absorbing details. Vocational partnerships, full healthcare coverage for entry-level roles, a mentorship program. "I want you to head it," Ava added. "You'd stay in facilities, but with an expanded title, Director of Infrastructure Development. Full authority to build the program from the ground up." Jack stared at her, stunned. "You're serious?" "As a rebuilt firewall," she replied. He didn't laugh. Not yet. Instead, he set the folder down and looked at her closely. "Why me? Because this company needs a moral compass, and because I trust you more than I trust anyone on the 31st floor." Jack was quiet for a long beat. Then, "You're going to take heat for this. I already have," she said, "but some choices you make for survival, others for legacy." Jack exhaled. "You really think I can do this? I don't promote people because of their resumes," she said softly. "I promote them because of what they do when no one's watching." His gaze softened. "And this," she added, her voice quieter now, "isn't about repaying a debt. It's about building something better. Together." The word lingered in the air. Together. Not just as colleagues, not just as leaders, but as people who had walked through fire in different ways and had chosen not to be hardened by it. That evening, Jack and Emma took a walk through Central Park. Spring was peeking through the ground patches of green shy crocuses and puddles that reflected the sky. Emma skipped ahead, arms wide. "Daddy, watch me fly," Jack smiled. "You already are." He'd told her about the new job, about how things might change, more meetings, more responsibilities, but also more chances to help people who needed someone to believe in them. "Will I still get to see you in the morning?" she had asked. "You'll always see me," he said. Maybe not always in boots and tools, but always. Now walking behind her, he saw the future more clearly than he ever had. Not just a better paycheck, not just restored dignity, but the power to build something lasting for her and for all the kids like her whose parents were trying to hold on with scraped knuckles and quiet courage. Back in her penthouse, Ava watched the city lights flicker to life. Across the street, in another high-rise, someone was replacing a bulb on a rooftop sign. She smiled. The lights stayed on, because someone like Jack was still out there, fixing things no one noticed, and, finally, being seen. It was after hours at Whitmore Tower, the city below softened by twilight, and the building itself unusually quiet, almost reverent. The hum of conversation, the clack of heels, the buzz of conference calls all had faded into a peaceful stillness as if the tower were taking a breath at the end of a long day. On the 32nd floor in the executive wing, Ava rarely used, one office remained lit. Jack stood inside, sleeves rolled up, a notepad in one hand, the other resting lightly on a scale model of the new training center he was designing. On his laptop screen, a spreadsheet of budget projections shared space with a childlike drawing tacked to the corner, a stick figure holding a light bulb smiling under a caption in block letters, "My dad fixes the world." He smiled softly. Still here came a voice behind him. He turned. Ava leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed but relaxed. She wasn't in her usual suit. Instead, she wore a soft navy sweater and jeans, her hair loose, face unguarded. For the first time, she looked less like a CEO and more like Ava. Jack nodded. Couldn't sleep. The electricians are finalizing specs on the Bronx site. We break ground next month. I know, she said. I approved the final permits this morning. He set the pad down. You're here late. So are you. He gave a small chuckle. I guess we're both bad at leaving things unfinished. Ava stepped into the room and walked toward the window. The skyline stretched out before them, lit with 1,000 warm lights. Below, cars moved like veins through the city's circulatory system, constant, driven alive. This place looks different at night, she said. Jack joined her at the glass. It always does. That's when you notice what's really lit and what's just pretending. She glanced at him, thoughtful. Funny how many things we passed by without ever really seeing. He nodded. Until they break. They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder, watching the city breathe. Then Ava spoke again, softer now. I've spent most of my career building walls so nothing could touch me. I thought it made me strong. It made you survive, Jack said gently. She looked at him. And then you showed up. Quiet. No ask. No agenda. Just hands that helped. A voice that calmed. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. You reminded me that strength isn't about how much you carry, it's about who you carry it for. Jack swallowed hard. I carried you out of that car. But you gave me a reason to keep walking. A long pause. Then Ava reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. She opened her palm. Jack blinked. His old scarf. You never came back for it, she said, smiling. He laughed softly, taking it from her. I thought it was lost. She met his eyes. It wasn't. A week later, the city gathered for the ribbon cutting of the Second Light Training Center, a sprawling, modern space in the Bronx where veterans, single parents, immigrants, and trade school graduates would learn from experienced technicians and gain pathways into careers like Jack's. Ava gave the opening remarks. But Jack delivered the speech everyone remembered. He stood before a crowd of students, board members, donors, and media, with Emma, perched in the front row, legs crossed and proud. He didn't speak from a teleprompter. He spoke from his life. I never thought I'd stand behind a microphone, he began. But I've stood behind broken panels, busted boilers, and lights that refused to turn on. And I've learned that the most important thing isn't knowing how to fix something. It's believing that fixing it is worth the effort. When people are given the tools, the time, and someone who sees their potential, they rise. This center isn't about charity. It's about opportunity. The woman who helped build this with me, she gave me a second light. And now we want to pass that light forward. The applause rose warm and sincere, and Emma clapped loudest. Afterward, as cameras clicked and people shook hands, Ava found Jack beneath a simple overhead lamp on the center's main floor. "It worked," she said. Jack smiled. "Yeah, and the lights stayed on." That night, the two of them sat on the center's rooftop garden, the city pulsing below them. Emma had fallen asleep inside on a beanbag, a book open in her lap. The stars above peeked through the haze of light pollution, faint but persistent. Jack leaned back, hands behind his head. "I used to think the world didn't need men like me," he said quietly, "that we were invisible, disposable." "You're not," Ava said. "I know that now." She looked at him. "What changed?" He turned to her. "You didn't walk away." For a long moment they simply sat in that truth. Then Ava took his hand, threading her fingers with his. Not urgently, not possessively, just surely. I think she whispered, "This is how healing begins." He nodded, eyes on the distant glow of downtown. "And how stories begin," he added. "No," she said, resting her head on his shoulder, "how the right ones continue." Months later, Emma placed a framed photo on her nightstand. It was of her dad and Ava in hard hats standing under a newly lit sign, Second Light Training Center. She turned off her lamp and whispered, "Good night, world." And in the darkness, the building across the city blinked back. The light was still on, because someone chose to stay, and someone else finally chose to let him in. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below, and let us know what part of the story moved you the most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another tale that brings warmth, hope, and a little light to your day. Thank you so much for watching. We're truly grateful to have you here.